Welcome back to the deep dive. We're tackling something really cool today. How those worlds we escape into through science fiction. They aren't just for fun or, trying to guess the future.
Right.
Our sources, this stack of articles and notes you shared, they really dig into how SF is actually a seriously powerful tool for philosophical thought, especially when we get into tricky stuff like bioethics.
That's absolutely right. And our mission, really, in this deep dive is to pull out the core insights from all this material, the stuff that, really sticks, showing how imagining these sometimes impossible futures can light up the real ethical questions we're facing right now, especially with science and tech.
Yeah, because SF does something kind of unique, doesn't it? Unlike maybe everyday stories, it pushes us beyond normal human experience
Totally.
into worlds with like conscious AI or radical genetic changes or completely different ways society could work.
And that's just perfect for philosophy. Philosophy loves to take concepts that we usually see welded together in reality, think mind and body or the individual and society, and kind of pry them apart, see what happens if you tweak one bit.
Exactly. And science fiction gives us these really richly imagined, like densely described scenarios to play with.
It's not just a simple one-liner thought experiment like what if X. It gives you the detail, the emotional connection almost,
Yeah.
that helps you really feel the implications in a way that just abstract statements might totally miss.
Yeah.
The sources even mention, how even simple logic puzzles can trip us up if they're too abstract.
Oh, right.
But give us a concrete situation, something to picture, and our minds often handle it much better.
There's a great line from one of the sources. It just nails it. Science fiction is a tool for imagining the possible shape of the future.
It really is a way to kind of pre-run scenarios in our heads.
Okay, so to really get how SF does this, maybe we should back up a bit. When the sources talk about thought experiments, what do they actually mean by that term?
Yeah, good question. So a thought experiment is essentially it's a method of imagining a scenario. But crucially, it's not just random daydreaming.
Right.
It's specifically set up to produce some kind of cognitive result, an insight maybe, or understanding that relates back to the real world, not just the fantasy world you cooked up.
So there's a point to it,
Yeah,
a goal for the whole mental exercise.
exactly. The sources use some classic examples from Galileo to show how this works. He was a master at this.
Ah, Galileo. Right.
Yeah, think about his Salviati ship experiment. He was pushing back against that old Aristotelian idea. The one that said if the Earth was actually moving, a stone dropped from a tower wouldn't fall straight down.
It'd land behind it because the ground moved.
That was the idea.
Yeah.
So Galileo says, okay, imagine you're inside a ship. It's moving smoothly, constant speed. Now, drop a stone from the top of the mast.
Okay. Yeah, in my head, I instantly see it landing right at the base of the mast. Doesn't matter if the ship's moving or docked.
Precisely. And Galileo argued, well, dropping a stone from a tower on a moving Earth would be just like that, like dropping the stone from the mast of the moving ship.
Yeah.
It works so easily in our heads because we can perfectly imagine that smooth, constant motion, maybe even better than we could set it up in reality with friction and bumps. It uses our built-in understanding of how things work.
Our intuition.
Yeah, intuition based on experience to show what should happen according to basic physics.
And he had that other brilliant one, too, about falling bodies, challenging Aristotle's claim that heavier things fall faster.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one. He asks you to imagine, okay, take a heavy cannonball and a lighter musket ball. Aristotle says the cannonball falls faster. Fine. Now imagine tying them together with a string and dropping them. What happens then?
Okay, well, if heavier is faster, the combined object is heavier than the cannonball alone. So it should fall even faster than the cannonball did by itself.
Right. That's one prediction from Aristotle's rule. But
wait, his rule also says the lighter musket ball is slower. So shouldn't it act like a brake, slowing down the cannonball when they're tied together?
exactly. You've hit the contradiction. Aristotle's own rules predict the combined object should be both faster than the cannonball alone and slowed down by the musket ball. It can't be both.
Wow. And he figured that out just by thinking it through. No actual dropping required.
Purely through imagination. It shows how these mental exercises can actually reveal new understanding or expose flaws in existing theories, all without new empirical data. They can advance knowledge, kind of like real experiments, but they happen entirely in our heads.
That's pretty powerful.
And this leads into the idea of mental modeling, which the sources talk quite a bit about.
Mental modeling.
Yeah, it's this theory that suggests our minds don't just crunch abstract logic like, a computer program. We actually build and manipulate these little mental models, these mini simulations of situations. We build them based on what we already know, our experiences. And this lets us reason about scenarios, especially dynamic ones or things involving space, often much faster and more intuitively than trying to work through purely abstract arguments.
So we're running little sims in our heads.
Sort of, yeah. And this ability to build and run these mental simulations is really core to how thought experiments work, how they give us those aha moments.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So here's where it gets really interesting for me. If thought experiments work by building these mental models, why is science fiction such a particularly good fit for doing this?
Well, it comes down to narrative, doesn't it? Science fiction tells stories, and narratives are incredibly effective at getting our minds to build those detailed mental models.
How so?
Think about it. Stories rely on our background knowledge, our assumptions, to fill in the gaps in the world, right? They unfold over time, there's cause and effect. That whole structure is exactly what helps us create those rich, detailed, manipulable mental simulations.
The sources do mention that some regular literary fiction already does this kind of thing. They point to George Eliot's novels, calling them experiments of life.
Right, yeah. Exploring complex human situations and philosophical ideas through characters isn't unique to SF, absolutely. George Eliot did it brilliantly.
But SF has something extra.
Exactly. Science fiction's unique advantage, its sort of superpower here, is its speculative nature. It deliberately helps us imagine scenarios that don't exist yet, or maybe couldn't exist in our current reality.
Right.
It lets us build models of hypothetical futures or alternative worlds, pushing the boundaries of our concepts in a way that, a realistic novel set in present-day London usually doesn't.
Now, the sources do raise a couple of potential, let's say, speed bumps. One is this idea of under-description. Like, take the Star Trek transporter. We don't really know the nuts and bolts of how it works. If the thought experiment hinges on that exact science, couldn't that be a problem?
That's a fair point. And yeah, sometimes the tech is kind of hand-waved. If your philosophical question relies entirely on the precise physics of something impossible, then yes, that could definitely be an issue. But the counter-argument is, well, first, not all SF is super vague about its concepts. And second, often you don't need every single technical detail of the fictional world to be perfectly described. You just need the bits that are relevant to the specific question the story is making you think about.
So you don't need the transporter schematics to think about, say, personal identity if the transporter duplicates someone.
Exactly. The core concept is the duplication and its effects, not the fictional physics that caused it. Another concern that comes up is just outright impossibility.
Like magic.
Yeah, or things that seem to defy basic logic in a way that makes them maybe less useful for real-world thinking. The source mentions something like the Cheshire Cat's smile lingering without the cat that might be too far out there to ground a usable thought experiment.
Okay. But some impossibilities are useful.
Yes, definitely. Think about imagining a world where, say, water is entirely controlled and sold like a luxury good. Now, maybe the physics of total control are impossible, but the concept.
That feels relevant.
Yeah.
Resource scarcity, commodification.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the key isn't whether the entire fictional world could literally exist down to last detail. It's whether the important features, the ones driving the thought experiment, were similar enough to our world or maybe offer an insightful contrast to it.
Ah, okay.
The sources talk about this in terms of analogical arguments. When you draw an analogy between two things to learn something, the analogy doesn't require the two things to be identical in every way.
Just in the ways that matter for the comparison.
Exactly. Only the properties essential to the thought experiment's point, its cognitive upshot, need to be analogous between the fictional world and the real one.
So you got to identify the core idea being played with and not get too hung up on the space opera stuff around it sometimes.
Precisely. Focus on the relevant conceptual machinery.
Okay. So how does this power of SF, this ability to build mental models of these speculative worlds, really connect specifically with bioethics?
Well, it's a really natural fit, actually. Bioethics itself kind of lives at that crossroads of science and ethics, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
Just like science fiction often does. And so many crucial bioethical issues deal with technologies that are emerging or still purely speculative.
Things that are brand new or might be possible down the line.
Or even things that are theoretically possible now, but performing them on real people would be completely unethical.
Which is exactly the kind of space SF loves to explore.
Absolutely. And the sources give some really good reasons why thought experiments generally are so vital in bioethics. First off, as we said, real cases for brand new tech often just don't exist yet.
You need to think about the ethics before it's happening.
Exactly. And second, like you just hinted, doing real-world experiments to test ethical boundaries can be, well, deeply unethical itself. You can't just clone people to see what happens.
Right.
And sometimes thought experiments can actually be better than real cases for teasing out